Howdy folks, you're watching Deuce, and today what we're going to talk about is black powder conversion cylinders. Now I have a ton of videos on my channel regarding the black powder revolvers. I love these things. These things are fantastic. They are fun, they are inexpensive to shoot, they're inexpensive to buy, and you actually don't go through a lot of ammo, but you go through a lot of fun. You have a lot of fun with these if you like the intricacies of reloading on the fly, which is what these things are about. But I get a ton of questions on a daily basis, actually, on converting these black powder revolvers to take cartridges. So exactly what does it take for you guys to go from reloading these black powder revolvers traditionally with a black powder flask, then cramming a bullet on top of that, adding a primer on the back of that before you can go ahead and shoot it? What does it take to go from that to using one of these? Well, all you have to do is replace the cylinder. Now, these cylinders, these come out pretty easily on the Remington type, which I just did a video about bashing Remington, but the old Remington design is what you want to be looking at as far as cartridge conversions go, because every time you add the bullet, the cartridge to your cylinder, change those out, you're going to have to take off the cylinder for these to work. Now these, the Colt version, you can also remove the cylinder as well, but you've got to take the whole gun apart every time and possibly lose the wedge, the barrel wedge. So right out of the gate, I highly recommend the Remington version just for convenience, which is what this is about. This is not about, the cartridge conversion is not about being a traditionalist. A cartridge conversion is about convenience. So you don't have to get the big 12-inch Buffalo model, but any of the Remington versions will work. The way these cartridge conversion cylinders work is pretty interesting and very simple. They, on the outside, they are the exact form and function and fit as the standard cylinder in your black powder revolver. But you take that cylinder out, and the back half comes off the rest of the cylinder, and inside that is where the spent brass or the new cartridges go. And then you just basically put the two halves back together, and the back half has individual firing pins behind every single cartridge. So it has its own firing pins, and you put the whole thing back together and into your revolver, and you're good to go. If you have a Remington style revolver, it should be a very quick reload procedure, much faster than using the black powder option. And because there's a firing pin behind every single cartridge, there is no additional safety features. There is no firing pin block. There is no additional hammer block or anything of that nature. You have the exact same safety features on the cartridge conversion cylinder as you had when you used black powder, which means you either have to put the hammer down onto a safety notch in between two chambers on the cylinder, or you can reload 5 rounds in a 6-round cylinder. Those are your two options for safety, and that's the way it has been from the get-go, basically. Adding a conversion cylinder does not change that. There are a few different companies out there making these cartridge conversions for you, these cylinder conversions for you, and they make them for all different types and varieties and companies making black powder revolvers. So they make them for both Pieta and for Uberti. They also make them for the Remington versus the Colt models. They also have the different caliber options. So if you got a 44 caliber versus 36, and I believe I've even seen a 32 caliber option on there. So you can use like 32 ACP or 32 Smith & Wesson, whatever the cartridge is that they use. You can go from the black powder to the cartridge version of that for pretty much anything you want to. Please note, there are some do's and don'ts in using a conversion cylinder on your black powder revolver. Number one is that you cannot use a brass frame. This would not be, even though this is a Remington model, this would not be a good candidate for a cartridge conversion because it has the weaker brass frame. It's perfectly fine for a black powder, but if you want to use the slightly stronger cartridges on the market, then you're going to need a steel frame like this Colt model. A secondary safety note is the fact that these were not manufactured to withstand the power and pressures of modern day cartridges. They weren't. They were set up for black powder. Even the modern day made ones are set up just for black powder. So you have to bear in mind that you cannot use all the different cartridges that are available on the market. So even though with a conversion cylinder, I would be able to shoot a 45 long Colt of any variety, it would fit in here. It would not be appropriate to use anything but what's called a Cowboy load. So what does Cowboy action loads or Cowboy action ammo mean? Well, that means it's been either loaded with black powder, which is very rare. I'll get to that here in a second. But either loaded with black powder or with smokeless powder. And it's been loaded with smokeless powder down to a level that it is equivalent to a black powder velocity and pressure. They use a certain type of gunpowder that's smokeless that emulates black powder, but it's not a black powder substitute. It is strictly a smokeless powder. The vast majority of Cowboy action ammo that's available commercially is going to be loaded with smokeless powder. Even the famous Black Hills ammo is loaded with smokeless powder. I believe Buffalo Arms is one of the few companies that makes the cartridges with actual true black powder. So if you want to go down that rabbit hole of shooting a cartridge conversion in an old black powder revolver using black powder cartridges, then that is one of the options that you have. Now, you can also reload, but do not do that without doing a ton of research, because reloading smokeless powder is very different from reloading black powder. The two are very, very different procedures. So do your homework before you go down the rabbit hole of black powder cartridge reloading. The last two things you need to consider before you purchase a black powder cartridge conversion cylinder is to remember that all these things are made differently. Different companies, different factories, whatnot. And there probably will be some minor fitting, filing, what have you, on the cylinder to work with your revolver. And lastly, one of the reasons why I do not personally have a conversion cylinder is because they are not cheap. In fact, they are very expensive. If you got a pretty decent deal on a steel frame revolver, then you will probably end up paying about the same price for the conversion cylinder as you did for the revolver itself. And I personally enjoy using the black powder. I like doing the whole reload at the range. It's unusual. If I want a cartridge type revolver, I'll just buy a cartridge style revolver. But if you want to do that, then just be aware that it will cost you some money. The idea, the concept of converting a black powder revolver to take cartridges is not new. It was done, actually, it first kind of became a very common procedure in the late 1800s. After the Colt Peacemaker hit the market, people were still walking around with these black powder revolvers. That would be like driving around in a Model T when everybody else had Corvettes. So this became very antiquated very quickly. So gunsmiths around the nation had this option where they would take your cylinder out and bore through the back of the cylinder, making it an open cartridge style revolver. And they would scallop out the side here. There's a little section there for you to put the primer on the nipple. There's a little scalloped area there on the frame. They just enlarged that to where you can actually slide a cartridge down through that into the cylinder. Now, a lot of them, some of the really nicer versions, put a loading gate there to keep the cartridges from coming out. On the rare case that you would have a cartridge lined up and it would point up, a cartridge could fall out. But most of them just left them open. Well, guys, that's it for me today. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give me a like and go subscribe. A lot more is on the way. If you have any comments, questions, or show ideas, leave that in the comment box below the video. I try to get to as many of those as possible. So go ahead and leave a comment. I always appreciate those. If you want to stay on Deuce and Guns channel, go ahead and click on one of these two videos right over here. And that will keep you watching away. As always, you guys have a great day. See ya.